Of conversation. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Well, actually, my neck of the woods, it's early evening,
But
but nevertheless, good morning to you.
based in New York City, 5 p.m. there right now as we're doing this live stream.
5:06, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to quibble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's we're just coming into spring over here. I'm assuming it means you guys are just going into autumn. What's the weather like in New York at this time of year?
It's quite pleasant, actually. This is some of the nicest weather we get. 60s, 70s, maybe a little cooler at night, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I'm actually right now. I'm a little upstate from New York City, and the leaves are starting to turn, and it's beautiful.
So for people who are sensible enough to use the Celsius scale, 60, 70, 60 is about 15, 70 is about 20. So 15 to 20 degrees Celsius for people who don't know that.
I apologize for our parochialism.
It's all right.
There was a time when I was younger. I think it was actually, I think when I was in like the third or fourth grade, it really looked like we were about to go metric. And so I remember doing projects in metrics, and then all of a sudden, I don't know. I think maybe it was Ronald Reagan killed that idea, and maybe and that was about it. So
It is a very strange thing that America hasn't gone that way. I mean, it's such a similar thing. We boil our water at 100 degrees. It freezes at zero. America is what, 31 degrees is 31 degrees is freezing.
32
zero.
degrees. 32 degrees is freezing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, Pat, I think, having that conversation 5 or 6 years ago, people might have thought like, oh, that's a little quirk about America. But now I think the rest of the world has become to realize that that's indicative of a much deeper problem that we have.
Well, speaking of much deeper problems, I think probably if you're up for it, I mean, I don't know if you're already over it, but the conversation that was the debate the other night, the train wreck inside a car crash on top of a dumpster fire of a debate seems to be universally accepted to be the worst debate in the history of American presidential politics. Actually viewed Mr. Packman this morning, and he was saying he even did some research with older people, and that no one's ever seen anything like this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I am an older person, and no, I've never seen anything like that. And yeah, no, it was, my daughter is 15 years old. I think this is the first debate that she actually like sort of paid attention to throughout. And the first thing when it was over, she texted me and said, that was an embarrassment. That was the worst thing ever. And for a 15-year-old who is, she's not the most, I imagine, she's, I think, politically engaged like a 15-year-old on some level. And, but for her to sort of have that level of awareness is both sort of like incredibly sad. And I was also proud that her assessment was correct. Yeah, nothing happened in that debate. I mean, it's interesting. And Biden came out the winner. And one of the things she said to me when I spoke to her on the phone later was that she felt bad for Biden, that she had some sympathy. Now, and I should make it clear, Joe Biden is not my pick in the primary, right? And I am Joe Biden is, within the context of the Democratic Party, has been someone that I've considered myself to be sort of like on the other side of the argument with. So, with just that sort of caveat, I'm just giving some analysis here, in that situation. I mean, as I was watching it, it was very hard for me not to think like, hey, Bernie Sanders would have handled this much better.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren would have handled this much better. Even Amy Klobuchar, who honestly, like, I would be moving into the back of your studio right now if I thought she was going to become president. I think she would have done better. But the interesting thing about this is Biden came out ahead in the polling. It's very hard to know if debates mean anything in the context of American politics, particularly general election debates. I think they have more value in the context of primaries. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump handily in the debates. And obviously, she did not win the presidency. I will say this, though. This debate, more than the Clinton-Trump debates, fed into the narrative, the pre-existing narratives of these two candidates, right? So in 2016, the narrative was both these candidates are unlikable. Donald Trump is unlikable because he's a bigot and because he's an idiot. And Hillary Clinton is unlikable because she's associated with corruption and considered to be sort of sort of corrupt and out of touch elite. In that debate, and I'm not litigating those positions. That's just, I think, was the broad consensus of the narrative. That debate, when Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump, it wasn't on those terms. Like the narrative wasn't, neither one of them hit the narratives, the sort of like meta narratives of that campaign. In this debate, Donald Trump came out as a sort of a lunatic, loose cannon, rude embarrassment. And Joe Biden came out as like, yeah, a decent guy. and who might not be able to put together a really coherent response, but just like more or less a decent guy and not a loose cannon.
Yeah.
And predictable. And I think the thing that's helpful for Biden in this context is that's the narrative he's been trying to nurture anyways. He's not running on anything. He's running on
I'm not him.
On what he's not.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm not Trump. Yeah, watching it from here in New Zealand, it was on at 2 PM or something. So half day of work and jump in front of the old goggle box and watch it. The impression I got.
I was going to say that's a lot of early drinking and heavy drinking, because that's exactly what I was doing when I was watching it. But
it was such a. I just I felt like that Donald Trump was the loser of the debate, but because of how he acted, because I didn't feel that Biden was that strong. And like yourself, I was thinking if Sanders had been there, I feel like this whole presidential run, if Sanders was there, it would actually be a genuine battle of ideologies. Well, maybe not from Trump, because probably Trump can't go that far, that deep. But with Biden in there, it feels like it's, different sides of the political spectrum, but it's the same ideology, whereas Sanders would have brought a different ideology into that conversation as well. I just think if Trump had been on form and not a complete lunatic, I think Biden might have been in a little bit of trouble. He wasn't strong. He was a bit, when I say stuttery, I don't mean because of his stutter. At one stage I think he was talking about the 200,000 death, and he said something like the 2,000, the 2 million, the 200,000. So he wasn't quite, fact. There was a few stumbles there along the way. But it's testament to how bad Trump was that Biden came out shining, even though his actual performance, if you took out all the Trump clips, was, I thought, pretty average.
I mean, I agree. And even I would even say maybe even worse than that. I mean, look, there was a big story at the beginning of the week. New York Times finally got a hold of Trump's taxes. He paid no taxes for many years over the past decade. He paid $750 for taxes. Now, this is beyond a layup for Joe Biden, because we know how Trump is going to respond, because Clinton said something to that effect in 2016, and he came back with, "I'm smart." And I think he said there was an exchange that was similar to that, to the extent that you can actually sort of like, pull out any type of real exchange. But Joe Biden, I mean, if I was advising Joe Biden, I would tell him, like, literally there's like 3 things that you needed to say. And, one of them was, you say you're smart for not paying taxes. So, which means that the rest of the people who are paying taxes are suckers. So the construction worker out there who you're paying less taxes than, he's a sucker. The teacher, they're a sucker, and you're the smart guy. You're the smart guy, and the cop is a sucker. You're the smart guy, and the guy who works at the bank, he's a sucker, and just so on and so on. And then when you had the opportunity to sign a new tax bill, you basically said, I'm still the smart guy, and they're still the suckers. And I feel like if Joe Biden, like, there's no way Joe Biden's advisors didn't tell him to say something to that effect. And I just don't think that he could execute it. But nevertheless, I think the bottom line is, this is a referendum on Donald Trump. And Joe Biden didn't do anything to sort of change that dynamic. My fear about that dynamic is that there are external things that can happen that can implicate that. And because Joe Biden is running on nothing. He doesn't have the ability to impact the trajectory of the campaign in a way that a candidate who was running on something could. And so, but that's the situation it is. We have a very binary choice here right now in the country. It's, do I want Donald Trump to be president or not? And as both, a parent and a citizen and as a leftist, I think all of my agendas are going to be better served with a Joe Biden presidency than a Donald Trump one.
And so, much like me, not that my opinion matters in the slightest because I don't have the right to vote, but from looking from the outside over, I was always just like saying, if Bernie got in, that would be so interesting for America and potentially positive, and having someone driving America towards perhaps some of the places that the rest of the Western world has.
Yes.
So that was sort of the philosophy I took. Was not as a voter, but as a, well, I don't want to use the word commentator, it's so wanky, but as a person looking in from the outside. But much like you, I was thinking about what Biden needed to do if I was one of his advisors. And I wrote a piece just prior to the election, actually. And my response was, Biden needs to be brutally honest in two particular areas. And one of the areas was the Hunter Biden thing. And people can go to my blog, patbritton.com, if they want to check it. But basically, he needed to say, yes, nepotism is real. Yes, it's not very attractive to the average person. But if it's eliminating from the presidency, let's have a look who one of Trump's nepotistic children are currently sitting in a place of power that can make a difference to you. And the other thing was the Ruth Bader Ginsburg thing. I felt like that the problem that one of the problems that the Democrats are facing at the moment is much like we are all going, but the Republicans said this 4 years ago. The Republicans are saying, yeah, but the Democrats said this 4 years ago that you can elect someone in the final year. So what they actually need to do is be brutally honest and go, you know what? You fuckers stole one from us and we want one back. And when we get one back, we will agree to return things to an element of normality. Because the truth is, the only reason I think that the Democrats are looking to push, obviously, to get one back is because they had one nicked off them in 2016. And so to try and now say you can't elect someone in the final year, then they just roll the tape of Biden saying you can elect one in the final year. So that tit-for-tat thing is not working. That changing of position is not working. And I just think if Biden had the ability or to come out with something brutally honest, I think it might be quite refreshing to the public as well to go, this is why. This is actually not politics. This is actually correcting a wrong, and then we can move forward. That's what I was thinking, at least, if I was advising Biden.
Yeah, I mean, the Hunter Biden thing, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the nepotism, it's the nepotism, I mean, it exists in every aspect of our society on some level, but it is, particularly egregious and corrupt in some respects. But 2 days ago or 3 days ago, the Senate committee that was investigating Hunter Biden came out and they had nothing.
Yeah, of course.
It actually fell on its face. I mean, so the reason why I wouldn't bring it up, and even, it was funny, Trump did bring it up, and Biden specifically responded as if Trump was referencing Beau Biden, his son who had died, who was Attorney General for Maryland and was, I think he was a captain in the U.S. Army. I believe that was the service he was in, and had fought in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is all the stuff that I'm not terribly excited about, but he pretended that he said that, or maybe he got confused. I don't know, but I can tell you that my daughter also responded and said, that was when, he felt bad for Biden, and I mean, the alternative reality where the American public wants to, hear that honest response and that the media won't twist it and run with it would be nice. But I don't think I think, look, Biden's running the right campaign for Joe Biden, which is lay low, hope things go well, that people hate Donald Trump. He doesn't have to deal with misogyny. He doesn't have to deal with racism. He's a white old man.
Yeah.
And he represents, I think for many people, some type of nostalgic return to the Obama era and to an era where there isn't this much sort of strum and dang. And, the COVID has helped him, frankly. not just because Donald Trump has been horrible at a response of it. I mean, beyond, I think, arguably criminal. And, but also because Joe Biden had no energy. And when basically it was announced in March, right after almost he was the nominal winner of the primary, that basically there will be no campaigning. That was the best day that could ever happen to the Joe Biden. I mean, it's funny. It's also sad.
Yeah.
And I said it contemporaneously. It's like, this is going to be great for Joe Biden because he's not going to have to leave the House. And nobody's going to say, why aren't you leaving the House? He's going to be able to say, because I'm a responsible individual.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm completely exhausted and I can't leave the House. And, look, I've been saying for some time that I'm quite convinced that a can of soup can beat Donald Trump. I think there's going to be two scenarios that in my mind are equally likely, because I just can't parse this. One is that Joe Biden will win in as big of a landslide as I've seen in my lifetime, maybe since Nixon, even maybe bigger than Reagan's, I think, second term. The other scenario is that Biden wins the popular vote by anywhere from 3 to 10 million votes. And there are 2 or 3 states which are much closer. And there is a delayed counting on the ballots because of the mail-in ballots. I'm thinking like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida, and maybe Arizona, although Arizona and Florida count the ballots earlier, so it may be less of an issue. And there is interference in the counting of those ballots. And then what happens is you start to get bumped up against a deadline as to when electors, I don't know how much you know about this process. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot written about it recently. Bart Gellman has a piece in The Atlantic. Jeffrey Toobin has a piece in The New Yorker. There have been others who have discussed this. But what happens, we have a very bizarre system of electing a president, which becomes more bizarre as more pressure is applied to the outcome. And that is the popular vote in a state. Ostensibly, the popular vote in the state is chosen by the state legislature to be the mechanism in which electors are sent to Washington and basically then provide their vote. The state lawmakers can change their mind and say, actually, no, because there's improprieties in the vote, whatever they deem that to be, we will be the ones who choose the electors. And then those electors go to Washington, D.C., and they have to be okayed by the Congress. Now, usually this is all pro forma. But in this instance, the Congress would be very skeptical about a state, let's say, dominated by Republicans, Pennsylvania. Maybe there's a court case there. In Pennsylvania, you have a left-leaning state Supreme Court, but in Michigan and Wisconsin, they're very right-leaning. And maybe it gets kicked up to the Supreme Court. We now know what that court is going to look like. In Congress, despite the fact that the Democrats have more seats, it becomes like the Senate.
It's one vote per state, isn't it?
One vote per state, yeah. which is determined by which party has the most Congress people from that state. Now, even though the Democrats have 40 more Congress people in there, most of them come from 2 states, New York and California.
Yeah.
And so the Republicans have a majority of those states. I mean, so you know this process. I don't know if your audience does, but that's so there's a lot of opportunity for all sorts of insanity. And I remember, the 2000 election vividly. In fact, I spent 2.5 months. I was an actor at that time, and I spent 2.5 months. I wasn't working, taking photos of my television. And I had I turned them into refrigerator magnets, or I don't know what I did with them, but I was an obsession. And it was, the whole thing was completely nuts.
Look, I think that, what I hear you saying also, ironically, I won't bring it up, but I wrote a piece not long ago that basically says if Joe Biden doesn't win big on the day, then it's going to be a shit show. because as you say, there will be challenges, there will be court cases. If it goes to the Supreme Court, we know what's happening there now. If the Supreme Court is for it and it goes to the lower courts, Trump has stacked those. And I think unless Joe Biden, Joe Biden's obviously a massive favourite at the moment, but if he doesn't win big on the day, I think it goes to 50-50 chance of either person getting in.
And it's very hard for him to win big on the day because of the nature. Even in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania now, you have you can count the ballots up to 5 or 6 days after Election Day.
Yep.
And so as long as those ballots are postmarked on that day, so many people could go down and actually mail their ballot on what we call Election Day, and they will not get to the place where they're counting them for 2 or 3 days. So it's more than likely your scenario B is in the offing. So
yeah, and also there's research that shows, and it was something like 80% of Trump voters said they'd be there on the day, and 58% of Biden voters said they'd be there on the day. So that's not only do you then have those states coming into play, but as a population, Biden voters are more likely to vote by mail, and Trump voters are more likely to come in person. So there's every scenario. I actually sort of expect...
They call that the red mirage.
Yeah, I actually expect
the term they're using.
That Trump's will probably be in the lead at the end of the day. I think that's probably if there was a wager on that, it wouldn't be bad odds, I would say.
Yep, I agree.
I'm wondering as well, and I was just about to bring it up so I could research it. I had this thought the other day, first time I've ever had this thought. America, biggest Western country in the world, about 330 million people. Western country, obviously. There's China and there's India. And I think by population, the next biggest is about, I'm talking Western country, I think is Germany on about 90 million. And for the first time, I just thought, wow, I wonder if 330 million is too big for a Western country. And I was thinking about it seriously, because then you think about the divide and what's happening, and again, how you elect your president, as you've been going through. I've been saying this for years, that when people have been talking about, these right-leaning, right-wing presidents, whereas since 92, I think the right has only won the popular vote once, which means 11 out of the last 12 elections, the left has won the popular vote, says to me that America is a left-leaning country, just statistically speaking. Mitt Romney, of course, comes out the other day saying, the Supreme Court will now reflect the centre-right, truth that this country is. John Oliver did a really good piece this week. If people don't understand how that all works, if you can find online, last week tonight with John Oliver, he actually went through all of this and showed a bunch of these stats about the number of times the right has won versus the left has won, and how America probably should be deemed a left-leaning country. But I was just wondering if anything to do with the size of the country, 330 million people, it's just too big. And I've had people say before that the states in America are sort of like the countries in Europe. They're separate and independent, but a part of a big group. Of course, in Europe, they don't have a king or a president to run all of Europe. But as silly as it sounds, maybe secession is not such a bad thing for some of these states, and maybe there should be a right wing and a left wing America.
Excuse me one second. I interviewed someone, I'm trying to remember his name now, who had a book about this very topic. Maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, and that there has been multiple times that the country has come close to this. And so, look, I think there's some merit to the idea. I just don't think that's happening right now.
Well, it seems that though that there is such a cocked up system. I've had this conversation before when we've had sort of American commentators on, so not to belabor the points, but here in New Zealand we have a voting system where we get 2 votes for our national election. One is for the party we want to support. One is for the member of parliament we want to represent us in our area. So I live in an area called Dunedin North, which is in the South Island, bottom of the South Island. I have my current MP is Labour Party MP, a left-wing MP, David Clark. He was also the Minister of, so he's in government because we have a left-wing government. So I get to vote for a single person out of the people competing against him for this electorate, and then I get to vote for a party. Now, all that matters in New Zealand is really the party vote, because the party vote determines how many MPs are in government. So it's one person, one vote, no matter where you come from in the country. So what that means is you may get, and we have a threshold of 5%. If a party gets over 5% of the vote, then they're in government, whether they win an electorate seat or not. So if you get so that means if you get, 0.5% of a vote from 10 different electorates around the country, obviously your person's not going to win that electorate, but you'll get 7 MPs, give or take, that go to government from that party. And that's how we do it. And that means your one singular vote really does make a difference. And you don't get this disenfranchised, how we've won the popular vote.
Right.
Yeah, so that's how it works.
Well,
now, what it also means is at the moment we've got five parties in government. It looks like from our polling this time around, we'll end up after this election potentially with 4. We'll have a Green Party, which some would call far left. I'd probably call them left. We'll have a Labour Party, which will be centre left. We'll have a National Party, that's their name, which will be centre right. And we'll have a party called ACT, which would be, far right, Tea Party type group. And that means we've got a fairly widely spread, fairly even representation of political views, of political ideologies, and of MPs in Parliament.
Yeah, we don't have a parliamentary system. I mean, we could make our voting more democratic. We could get rid of the Electoral College. And one of the means in which that is, people are pushing that is the National Popular Vote Pact, where, and I'm not exactly sure where it's at this point, but a number of states have basically made an agreement that they will cast their electoral votes for the popular vote winner. And if you get enough states that they combine with 270 electoral votes, then effectively we have a popular vote in this country, which would change the dynamic of our elections. And I don't know. I can't point to a material benefit that would come from that necessarily, but it would certainly be more democratic.
Well,
I imagine, you'd get material benefits that emerge when you have the majority of people actually electing the president.
It does seem quite simple as well, maybe to me as an outsider, that if you've got primarily 2 people going up for one position, that not your, but a popular vote is the way to do it. The one that gets the most votes, one person, one vote, becomes the winner of that competition. That just seems almost a no-brainer. And so the college electorate that you over there.
if you were, it seems a no-brainer to you and to me, but I mean, if you're in the perspective of landowners and people who maintain power, and they want to basically say we're going to have a democracy that's going to be not a monarchy, but we don't want it to be too crazy. By democracy, what we mean is the king doesn't get to decide, the dukes will. And that's, I think, on some level what they had in mind. Didn't really sort of contemplate that there would be this many people and that they may have a perspective that would, they would have an agenda that would run contrary to the dukes or whatever the sort of like the members of the court are. I'm not too well versed in the monarchy.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, like I get what you're saying, and I understand, obviously not as well as Americans do, but why the system was set up like it was. But even in this John Oliver bit from Sunday night your time, Monday night our time, he brought up a clip, I think from the 1950s, of someone talking about, we got to be careful about this way we elect people, because you may get a situation where the party with the most votes doesn't get the presidency, and that was earmarked kind of from 50, 60 years ago, and it's exactly what's happening now. So it's well worth a watch if people want to find it, to give a bit of a background. Hey, speaking of kind of the electorate and the election and the White House in general, is Kayleigh McEnany like the worst person on the face of the planet? Because I sometimes think Trump, although he's horrific, he kind of just goes with the thought process, and what comes out. Whereas Kayleigh McEnany is prepared for the bullshit she puts out there.
I mean, She is the president's communications director, I guess, or chief, or whatever it is, spokesman, chief spokesperson. I have an incredibly I can't have a worse view of the members of the Republican Party, and I would put I would put a lot of people who are actually elected Republicans on that list before I would put Kayleigh McEnany. I don't. She is largely irrelevant. She does what she's told. She's paid money to do it. She's a good liar. I wouldn't want to hang out with her in any way, and I think she is probably I don't know how morally empty and corroded you need to be to do what she does. Maybe you don't need to be at all, but I would imagine it's significantly more than that. But, look, we have a situation where Donald Trump is out there trying to say that mail-in ballots are illegal as a way of undercutting the legitimacy of our government. The fact is that Paul Ryan, when California, who has a lot of mail-in ballots, they have so many ballots to count that very often what happens with California is that they don't get the full tally for 3 or 4 weeks, at least after the election, maybe more. Paul Ryan in 2016, even with Donald Trump winning, was going around saying it's very suspicious what's happening in California. It's very suspicious. Now, he knows it wasn't happening. It wasn't suspicious whatsoever. This is the most craven thing in the world from a guy who was like held in high regard by at least our conventional Beltway media. Now, I never did. I've always thought he's a charlatan. But really, the people who are enabling Donald Trump are people like Mitch McConnell,
right?
Are people like Paul Ryan, obviously, Kevin McCarthy, and frankly, the rank and file Republican legislatures, the lawmakers, almost to a person. They're all deeply implicated in this horror show that is Donald Trump. Donald Trump was not dropped out of a spaceship and just sort of appeared here and had this magical power to overtake the Republican Party. Donald Trump was essentially, the proper metaphor is not that he was dropped from a spaceship, but that he was hatched essentially from a Republican hatchery. Yeah. That he was born out of the Republican Party is the chicken, and the egg that came out was Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They had been building towards this for years. In fact, to someone like myself who spent years listening to right-wing talk radio and following the conservative movement, I've been doing this now for 15 years. I was doing it on AM talk radio for 5 or 6 years during the Bush administration. I was not. In fact, not only was I not surprised that Donald Trump won the Republican primary, I specifically said that his chances of doing so were very, very, very good. In fact, that night that he announced and came down the escalator, I was in MSNBC and I was in the green the makeup room, and there were a couple of like MSNBC correspondents or hosts, and they were laughing at Donald Trump, and I just got up and I'm like, you don't understand, they're going to lose to this guy. Because of who the Republican Party is. And they all looked like me. I was absolutely out of my mind. And I remember the moment, and they created a suit, and it just so happened that Donald Trump fit perfectly that suit that was created. And so Kayleigh McEnany is, she really, I mean, if you measure worst person in the world relative to what they've been able to do to the world, I would say that there's a whole long line of Republican operatives and lawmakers who deserve to be ahead of her in that line.
That's fair. I'll give her some more grace, perhaps, then.
I wouldn't do that. I would just get a little more jaded about the Republican Party.
I think one of the things, one of the things that you can't do that I can do, and those of us outside America, is we can look at your situation, you being an American and in America, as sort of theoretical, because it doesn't really impact us. I mean, they do say when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, and yes, there are economic flow-ons from what happens in America to the rest of the world, but actually, this is I'm living in a little country right now where we do have coronavirus. We do have it in our community, but we have it's largely disappeared. That's my little country, and I live right down here in the bottom of it, right down there. And this whole island here, the South Island, hasn't had any coronavirus for I don't know what it is, 140, 150 days or whatever. But we do have some in the North Island because that's where our major airports are. and it did get back into the community once. But we can sit out here and kind of look and hypothetically see what's going on and kind of use you as a test case, which is pretty patronising and unfair, but it's also a reality. And I was going to ask you about coronavirus, because here's one of the things that I'm confused about. And obviously you're a much wiser man than I, Mr. Seder, and people have been talking about, and commentators have been talking about, the coronavirus death rate not being as serious as it was, and it's sort of being down under 1%. Now, I like maths, and at the moment, the USA has had 7.4, nearly 7.5 million cases, of which 212,000 people have died. Now, to me, 212,000 people out of 7.5 million is about a 3% death rate. Where have I got that wrong? Because everyone's saying it's under 1%. In America, it seems to be, if you get coronavirus, there's a 3% death rate.
The death rate has gone like this, essentially. If I was to do a graph.
Yeah.
And so it's 3% since it began. But if you looked at the death rate in April, let's say, of this month, of this year, or May, I suspect it would be significantly higher than 3%.
So
we a lot of our deaths were front loaded.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning, frankly, the federal government, their response was beyond a poor response. It was almost I don't know what it is. I mean, like, if you're on the train tracks and you're running away from the train, right? That's what you should be doing. I don't know how to express how we responded to coronavirus in any other way, saying that we started to run towards the train. And the federal government ran towards the train, and the state governments were simply not prepared, because they're not supposed to be prepared in the absence of federal support, because the federal government has all of the assets that you need to assess and to deal with a pandemic. States simply don't have those resources, both from like a physical resources and from a knowledge base. Now, Andrew Cuomo closed down a lot of public hospitals in the state. He has politics that are very much about upwardly distributing the wealth in the state. He's responsible, I think, for some very bad decisions. With that said, he's running against the political pressure that says there's nothing going on here. And he's also in the absence of actually getting any real information from the federal government. So the death rate in New York City in and of itself was much higher than 3% in those first couple of months. And it has since leveled off because our president now acknowledges that it's real. Occasionally he'll wear a mask, although a lot of the damage has been done. We know now older people just know for their own sake, like, I've got to stay inside. There's mask use now. There is better practices in terms of treatment. And so it's really, they're looking at the death rate as it exists now, probably with, I don't know if they're using like a 2-week trailing measure or a 1-month trailing measure, but the death rate is decreasing relative to the average. With that said, we're heading into winter in many parts of the country. More people are going to go inside. We're already seeing an uptick in New York City. There's a massive uptick in South Dakota because they don't believe in the existence of it. And it's really just a question of how long can older people protect themselves, and how are these rural areas going to deal with a lack of ICU beds. And so we'll see. Hopefully that death rate at this point, the best we can hope is maintains. But it's a crap show, man. It's a total crap show.
I mean, using those numbers we were just looking at before, it's hard to really know what's going on at the rest of the world, because if you look at the numbers for other countries, they've got, America's been caught up to now. I mean, there is a chance that hopefully you'll go into the silver medal holding on number of cases sometime soon, hopefully for you guys. Some of the other countries, I don't know if they've got the best best practice when it comes to recording their cases. So that makes it hard to determine how America's doing against the rest of the world.
I'm not convinced that we do either. There was a change in July, and the numbers were not run directly from the CDC. And so I think there is, if you want to look at year-over-year deaths, and also, compute into that for an extended period of time over this year that we didn't have the same sort of activity that brings about a lot of different deaths. I mean, it's sort of hard to sort of parse out because it cuts both ways. But yes, I think there are other areas of the world that are catching up to us in some respects. But part of that is also if you think of this as like a race where, some runners hit the hill that exists later than others. You may gain distance on it when one of the runners is on the hill, but you still have that hill to climb too. And I think that hill is the second wave. And I think we are, I think we're going to see, this is a conversation that I would have a better sense of, 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Frankly, because winter is, every epidemiologist I talk to about past pandemics, they say 6 months peak to peak. Now, who knows? Maybe things have changed. But I'm quite convinced that by Thanksgiving, which is in late November here, that we're going to be faced with the question of a total lockdown again.
I'm looking at the set behind you there. I'm wondering how portable that is. Can you just fold that all up? And I mean, if you're in New York, 500 miles to the north, head up to Canada for a winter? Is that what you can do?
Well. Actually, I'm glad you said that. First off, I will tell you that I am actually outside of New York, and I did do a replica of my set. This is a replica of my set. I'm not actually in my studio in Brooklyn. I am outside the city right now. But also, on top of that, I have also this, which is my virtual set for Zoom. And so it's a little bit different, and I look a little bit different in it, but there you go.
It's always around the ears, eh? It doesn't quite work around the ears and the hair of those Zooms. But that looks all right. Looks fine.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's better than nothing.
So you can go on the road, just get a caravan or something and just find yourself a nice safe place. I used to watch those Life Below Zeros, people living in Canada where they're the only person for 300 miles living off the land. Go and do that. That's something like that will keep you safe. As long as you got the internet, you'll be right, won't you?
Yep, that's the theory anyways. Yeah.
The problem is you guys are now, I guess everyone's heard these jokes before, but one of the ironies about Donald Trump wanting to build a wall, it's like there is kind of a virtual wall now, but it's keeping all the Americans in rather than keeping anybody else. And you guys have almost, you're in it's a locked in syndrome, isn't it? You can't get out to go anywhere anyway, which is kind of terrifying, actually.
I mean, Americans don't travel like the rest of the world does anyways. And so, it's not unheard of. I mean, I know people who are, one of the conversations is, how are you getting your Canadian green card, essentially?
The coronavirus, I was also going to say we as individuals, and I think you can extrapolate this out to countries as well, we have attributes that are both positives and negatives for us. Like someone who's a little bit finicky and they really focus in on the details, that can be a negative because they spend too much time on things. It can be a positive because they often get very good outcomes for the work they're doing. I wonder, as America, if America was the attribute, the whole kind of freedom, I'm American, I'm free. That's great most of the time, but I think one of the things from the outside looking in that we're seeing at the moment with the whole, I'm not wearing a mask because I'm a free American, is the downside of that. It's like, don't oppress me, don't squash me. In fact, South Park started up last night and did a brilliant first episode, a pandemic special, where a bunch of the characters were wearing their masks on their chins and calling them chin diapers. And that's how they were going around wearing them, and they got told to put them over their nose, and they're like, I'm not putting this diaper over my nose, that's disgusting. And I wonder if that attribute of being, free Americans, having our freedoms, our liberties, at this very time when you kind of need to maybe follow the rules or follow the suggestions, is not helping. I'm sure we've all seen those memes of, World War II people being in the tunnels underneath London going, I'm going to leave my lights on because I've got every right to read a book at night time. Whereas actually, they were told to turn their lights off and they did. So they didn't get bombed.
I mean, I'm not sure I accept the premise about this, that brand of freedom necessarily being, helpful. FDR articulated another concept of freedoms from want, the freedoms that were more sort of like positive rights, as opposed to rights that are sort of negative, insofar as like I have rights not to be bothered by government, as opposed to rights that I have certain rights to things like healthcare, things that you guys in many respects take probably for granted on some level.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I would contend that there is that narrative out there, though, what you're talking about, like, the sort of the pioneers and the idea that I want the elbow room is what they would call it. Now, of course, the reality is that elbow room came at the expense of indigenous people. I think that sort of narrative, that meme, they use it to sell SUVs in this country, right? Like where it's like, I'm going to have a 4-wheel drive Jeep so that I can drive down to, the chain restaurant, like you don't need the 4-wheel drive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's supposed to sort of, evoke this notion of rugged individualism. The whole thing with the masks is that we have a problem in this country where there is a certain percentage of people. Bob Altemeyer, who was a professor at University of Manitoba, spent about 20, 30 years studying the phenomena of right-wing authoritarianism. He studied left-wing authoritarianism as well, but his findings were in North America, 25% of the population are right-wing authoritarians. Some of his work was the basis of John Dean's book from like 10 years ago. John Dean, being the former counsel to the president, to Nixon, who was implicated in Watergate, wrote a book, I think it's called Conscience of a Conservative. And this right-wing authoritarianism, they're the right-wing authoritarian followers, essentially. They're just bathed in ignorance in many respects. And, which is not to say that some of them, anyways, some of them have not been subjected to real material deprivation, but their reaction to it, the way they're responding, is out of a lot of ignorance, in some instances racism and anti-intellectualism, and so it's the freedom is just sort of like the wrapping paper. The real impetus here is that they've been told to. If you look at the Republican Party 5 years ago, and you polled deficit reduction 6 years ago, just the concept of deficit reduction, it would go through the roof.
Yeah.
They abandoned that, and this was a mantra for them for decades. They abandoned that as soon as they were told to abandon it. In fact, it was just like there are certain cultural signifiers, and the idea that wearing a mask has become one. It is, freedom is what they argue, but it's really what it is like, I just, it is simply a cultural signifier.
Yeah.
And so but I understand your point that there's a two-edged sword to some of these attributes of a country. I'm just not convinced that, that attribute of freedom loving is in any way meaningful. I think it's, show me who we've liberated that we love freedom so much. Show me how we exercise that, like outside of, I don't need to wear a mask. I don't know. I mean, I guess to a certain extent we have things like the First Amendment where that doesn't exist in Germany. And there may be other sort of, we have a media that's allowed to say completely false things with greater ease than perhaps, under the English system of things like libel, slander. But I'm not so sold on the premise that we have this positive character in terms of our perspective on freedom, because I think more often than not it is deployed to immiserate people in this country. And, we need to get back. I think one of the things we need to get back to is where the concept of freedom is deployed in a way of basically saying what we deserve in terms of material benefits.
I had a really interesting conversation with a professor, an academic, last week. His name was Professor Stephen Lewandowski. He's an Australian academic who's based in Bristol in the UK. And his area of interest in research was looking at why people choose to ignore scientific evidence. And also, kind of an aside from that as well, when people have a belief and they get given a stack of evidence contrary to their belief, yet they still stick with their belief rather than that. And I was going to play you a little clip because one of the things he said to me, and you've kind of already maybe nutshelled this, or I'm sure you'll say this in a different way, but understand this, but his research was primarily done in climate change. And that was the way he could look at climate change deniers. But he also says that it's the same for all the sort of conspiracy theories or contrary positions. So climate change was the area that he tested it in, but his research also shows it lays out with all the other areas. So, for example, anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, all that kind of stuff as well. And he found a really interesting connection as an identifier. I'll play this for you. It's only 30 seconds or so. And this is what he said about how to see and identify these people.
What you find is that what determines people's attitudes towards climate change is their attitudes towards the free market. If they're libertarian or free market fundamentalists or conservatives who think that, business should be laissez-faire, free enterprise, that cluster of attitudes, if people subscribe to that strongly, then chances are that they will reject the evidence from climate change. I can ask people.
So it was that was his that was the connection. Was the free market showed really clearly a strong connection between the conspiracy theorist and the free market. And I was thinking about it because the example I gave back to him and kind of said to him was, I always think about, especially looking at America, the conservative right being a religious idea as well. But then I stopped and thought, no, because there's lots of sort of religious people on the left that are greenies, that are like this is our Garden of Eden. But the ones that are the deniers are the ones who sit on the right, who probably are the libertarians or the free market adherents, people who adhere to a free market. I just thought it was a really interesting, tangible connection to find out who these people were.
I mean, I think that's true. I don't know if there's correlation or causation in terms of that specific thing. I can tell you that, like, I was once on a show with Christy Todd Whitman, who was the EPA head. I think it was under George W. Bush. And she said the reason why Republicans don't accept climate change is because liberals are so adamant about it. And, that is that is about as arrested of maturation in terms of assessment by an adult to decide how they're going to react to a physical natural phenomena as you could get. But the idea that a leader of a party, and she was the head of the EPA. I think she was governor of New Jersey at one point. The idea that someone who perceives themselves as a leader of the party, not the leader, but a leader, could articulate that as justification, as opposed to a deep, deep lament about her own party, is also stunning, right? Like, it's one thing to understand that realization and say, like, look, there are people who are a little bit immature and, we got to deal with that. And it's the reality. And one of the things I'm doing to fight against it is blah, blah, blah. But she was saying it as the real culprit here are those people who are really, really uptight about it.
Yeah.
And I just, there's something, and it just so happens that, well, look, the climate denialism, there is no major party in the world that denies climate change, except for the Republican Party in America.
Yeah.
That's simply the fact. There is no major political party in the world that denies it. That is because we have oil companies, primarily, who have funded a multi-decade project to undercut science and to undercut science specifically in this area. It's modeled after the tobacco industry. They did the same thing. We have Republicans going back to folks like Gertrude Himmelfarb, who's Bill Kristol's mom, saying things like, undercutting science is helpful for our agenda because it fundamentally means that we are no longer dealing with objective truth. We're dealing with subjective truth. And that is where we want to be on these topics. And, part of it is it's a party that has also merged with Christian fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism, broadly speaking. And that is their, mode of thought. And so, I think it is the case that, libertarians at the very least are looking to, are concerned theoretically about the impact on the free market, because it means that government is going to have to say, like, hey, you can't manufacture cars that get 5 miles to the gallon of gas, or you can't manufacture light bulbs that are using all of this thing, or we're no longer going to subsidize coal factories, or we're going to penalize you for the cost that you are externalizing to society, right? I mean, it's like your profit is being made at the expense of society, whether it's, directly in terms of health considerations or broadly the health of the ecology. And, so they don't want that. And so because they don't want to address it, they don't like the way that you have to address it, they decide it doesn't exist.
Yeah. And just to be clear, he wasn't saying every libertarian. He was saying from the research he's done, that's the key marker between the trends being shown in that area. But basically what you're saying is what he goes on to talk about, that if someone wants to fly in their private jet to, from New York to Los Angeles, it's easier to deny climate change rather than have to face the consequences of what your actions are doing, because then you might have to do something about it. So they pick the belief that it's not real, and then they can spend all that carbon and not have to worry about it. And there's no consequences for their actions, and they never have to address that as kind of a moral issue.
Yep.
Hey, Sam, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Before we take off in a couple of minutes, and it's a bit of a weird thing to say, but tell us what you think is going to happen. Like, upcoming election, who's going to be in, who's going to be out? What's going to happen with the Senate? Are we going to have? I mean, I was going to say we're going to have a grumpy Trump. I think no matter what happens, it's going to be a grumpy Trump. But do you think is Biden going to be in? Is it going to be stolen by the courts?
Let me give you my hopeful version. My hopeful version is that the Democrats take the Senate. There are, I think, over a half a dozen Senate races, maybe 8, maybe 9, that are, closer than I can. I don't know that we've ever had so many Senate races that are so close. I think the Democrats are going to take the Senate. I think that is highly likely. Even if Donald Trump ends up prevailing, I think Joe Biden's definitely going to get more votes than Donald Trump. I think it's possible he could get anywhere from 5 to 10 million more votes than Donald Trump. Will they come in all the right states? I would say 60-40. That Biden will prevail, and there'll be a significant confidence on the day of the election that he will be the winner. I think, frankly, the one thing that came out of that debate that was helpful is Donald Trump saying the name Proud Boys, because to the extent that we're going to get any type of interference with counting, I think it is going to come from the Proud Boys. I think Roger Stone, who orchestrated or at least helped coordinate the 2000 Brooks Brothers riot, has developed strong relationships with the Proud Boys. I would imagine that they will be deployed if the worst case scenario that we were talking about will happen, and that they will attempt to interfere with the counting of ballots in the way that the Brooks Brothers riot did in Florida in 2000. But look, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping that Biden wins. I can see 2 scenarios. One is Biden wins big. The other is it's contested. And like you say, who knows? I can tell you this. I think I voted for Barack Obama. I live in New York. The electoral votes are going to go to the Democrat. There is no question about that. In 2000, I voted for Nader. I think in '08 I voted for Obama. I think besides that one vote for Obama, I don't know that I voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in a state that I knew was going to go for a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
I will be voting for Joe Biden this year, largely because I'm not convinced that the margin of victory that he has in the popular vote won't be a political data point for a judge determining what they're going to do, or a lawmaker as to what they're going to do, or how hard they're going to fight against this, or how much outrage it causes and draws people into the street. I mean, it's one vote. At the end of the day, it probably doesn't mean anything whatsoever. But if it means, if it means even infinitesimally more than zero, that's why I'm going to vote for the Democrat this time. And so in a state that is clearly going to go Democrat. So I wish I had confidence in any prediction, frankly, but I think that's a fool's errand in the next 150 days.
And that's actually scary in itself.
It's indicative of how messed up this country is.
Yeah.
I've been saying for a long time, from the perspective of outsiders like yourself, I think here in America, many of us think Donald Trump is, an abnormality. That it's, once he's over with, we will revert to the mean. If I was from outside this country and I was looking in, I would say Donald Trump is, regardless of who follows Donald Trump, this is a very, very unstable country. Because, to go from George Bush to Barack Obama and then to Donald Trump, I would not anticipate stability from this country for a long time.
I had to smirk the other day when I was watching a clip off one of the channels. Is what I do, and they were talking about these two people who are fighting to be the leader of the free world. I think it's pretty clear that at the moment Angela Merkel is the leader of the free world, and I don't know how long it's going to take for America to get that title back, if ever, which I think echoes what you're saying about being unstable. Yep. We don't need an unstable leader of the free world, and so I think, as I say, Angela Merkel is the one that probably most of the Western world looks to at the moment. But, well, I guess we'll see after the election if America's allowed to have that title back, with the American president, I should say.
Pat, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Look, thank you so much. And I know it's taken us a while to get together. And look,
yes.
people who watch this and know the circumstances behind why we had to postpone last time, I know I sent you a note. I know you would have been busy and didn't get it. So also just deepest sympathies for what you and your team went through back then with Michael. It was shocking for the world, actually. And so yeah. And that's why it's been like, if and when we ever do this chat, it's completely up to you, Sam. So I'm really grateful you've come on.
I appreciate your understanding and your patience. It remains difficult, frankly. Yeah. But it was particularly then it was just incomprehensible in many respects.
Yeah, no, absolutely
devastating.
Hey, look, good luck. And I kind of mean that genuinely, because after watching that frickin' debate, for the first time ever, after watching that debate, I was like, mate, if I was in America, I'd be done with politics. I mean, that's how I was feeling. And I take it intravenously. And I just thought if this actually mattered to my vote, I would be done. So when I say good luck, I mean good luck, because I don't know whether that's going to mean the next debate is going to be double in numbers because people are looking for blood on the floor, or whether it's going to be 1/10 the numbers because people have reacted the way I felt and perhaps the way your daughter felt. So as someone who is a content creator online and who informs the public, you are kind of the front line of going thigh deep through this shit. Good luck with it. Actually, speaking of content online, who got to 1 million first officially?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You and Pac-Man.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Who got to 1 million first?
Who's Pac-Man? Pac-Man? I'm not familiar with that.
And I was going to say, look, I know we've run out of time, but in 30 seconds.
He did.
Oh, did he? I genuinely didn't know.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm not even there. Like he
I thought you were. Okay.
I mean, I'm at 9:30. I don't know, somewhere around there. Like we were tied at like 9:06 or 9:15 or something.
And then the Russians got involved.
And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, he just, but he's good at those things.
And look,
Pat, I got to run, but
yeah.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was great. I'm glad we caught up. I had fun.
all the best, and good luck again, mate. Have a good run
All
up to the election.
Thank you. Keep a room open there for me just in case.
Anytime.
Bye-bye.